Okay, Dibs, so we're talking through this 49ers offseason, trying to find a way for the 49ers to get better because the league around them, I think, is getting better, and the 49ers are at a disadvantage when it comes to improving this offseason because they already have so much money tied up in all their great players. And it really is a good problem to have. If you are in a situation where you don't have a ton of available money, that means you've doled out a ton of the money. There are a number of teams who are in that situation, and they doled them out to bad players.
Sure.
The Niners have it doled out, for the most part, to really good players and players that are performing really well. So I don't mean this to be some sort of disaster scenario for the 49ers because it is clearly far from that. They are a very good football team. They should be favorites to win the NFC West. They will probably be favorites to win the NFC. They will be one of the top 3 favorites to win the Super Bowl, no matter what else happens the rest of the offseason, unless, something crazy happens on the injury front. And I'm knocking on wood there because that would be a disaster. So I this is not some sky is falling, pack it all in, let's reset and start over because it's clearly not that. But it is, at least in my opinion, relatively clear that the 49ers have limited ways in which they can improve. But it's also interesting the way that we discuss this 49er team and everything you hear here on 95.7 The Game. If you're involved on Twitter, you see all the Niners content creators and all the Niner fans tweeting up a storm about this offseason, and so many wanted Danielle Hunter, right? Or go out and sign Khalil Mack or trade for Joey Bosa.
Right,
Get me another big-name guy, right? It was all unlikely from the beginning because of what this team already is. But there is a clear and obvious answer, at least in my mind, when it comes to how this team can get better. You are led by a young quarterback who logic would say should only be getting better, Dibs. But I don't know if it's a draftism thing, as your co-host and the guy I'm filling in for, Mark Willard, coined during the last season, and he's spot on with it. I don't know if it's a draftism thing when it comes to Brock Purdy, but I feel like when we discuss this 49ers team and ways in which they can improve, the young quarterback leading the way, who likely has room to get better because he's so young and relatively inexperienced, he should be higher up on that list. But for whatever reason, nationally, he's not that high up on the list in terms of ways in which the Niners can improve. And for me, how this team can get better, if it's not from the outside, which it won't be, step 1A is Brock Purdy take a third-year leap, bud.
Right, but how much better can he get? So you look at last year and how he played. He was, if not the MVP frontrunner, he was one of them for weeks 8 through 15 when you had the stink bomb at home against Baltimore, and he wound up top 5 in the MVP, and he led in yards per attempt. He had one of the highest-rated seasons in NFL history. He completed almost 70% of his passes. He was amazing. So, yeah, he can get better because he's only a third-year player, but how much better can he actually get? That to me becomes part of the interesting conversation, because if he gets a lot better, well, then now he's going to have the single best season in the history of the league.
Yeah, and I guess for me...
And that's all stats, I know, but...
And you're right. I mean, he was awesome in the regular season. There was the
3-game
stretch where they lost, what was that, week 6, 7, and 8, where they lost to the Browns,
lost to Cleveland.
Browns, Vikings, and Bengals.
And let's take them individually. You lost at Cleveland in not great weather against a team at the time that had the best defense in football.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't have a good game, and the ball was wet, and you had a couple of ball handling issues, and offensively... You were not great.
And he still gave you an opportunity to win that game, by the way.
And then your kicker missed a kick, and so you lost the game. Minnesota, he had a slow start, as I recall, and then he came out and he played much better. And defensively, you had no answer for Kirk Cousins. And then the Cincinnati game was one where it was just a scheduled loss, in my opinion. Last game before you get to the bye. And Brock Purdy he wasn't bad in that game. The defense was terrible.
Yeah.
And Joe Burrow did not throw an incomplete pass until the third quarter. He was awesome remarkable.
That's when everyone was like, "Oh, Bengals, look out. They're getting their mojo back."
Peaked,
and then all the injuries happened and they missed the playoffs entirely. I get that. I think in my mind, when it comes to Brock and getting better, it's less about the regular season. And this is a Niner team with all the talent, assuming general health, they're going to be in the postseason. But if I were to ask you to judge Brock Purdy's postseason play, that, at least in my mind, Dibs, and maybe you disagree, let me know, that felt, as I think back on it now, quite different than the regular season felt. And there were bumps in a number of those games. He probably played his best game in the Super Bowl, oddly enough.
Right.
He wasn't incredible, but he certainly wasn't bad. It was a bad first half, both against the Packers and against the Lions, and he obviously figured things out in the second half of those games. But are you? If you're asking me, can Brock Purdy get better and improve on those postseason appearances? I would say absolutely, for sure he can.
Yeah, I mean, he can play better, but you're asking him to play, really, really well in the toughest of games and the high leverage games. And I think that you saw in both those games, Green Bay and Detroit, there were throws that were available that he turned down, that he didn't maybe have his head up, and he didn't trust the play long enough to make those throws. So yeah, he could probably get better in the postseason. I look at a regular season where he was among the best 2 or 3 quarterbacks in football. So I would look elsewhere as far as, areas where the team can actually get better. If Brock Purdy has another year like he did last year, even in the playoffs, you're going to be just fine. And I don't know if you are going to lean on him, quote, playing better for your team to actually make it further than they made it.
Yeah. Yeah,
I didn't think that he was the problem, is all.
He certainly wasn't the problem, and he wasn't the reason that they lost the Super Bowl. But if we're also being honest about what it takes to win the Super Bowl, generally speaking, you need a star quarterback. I mean, you look at, I have the list here somewhere, you look at the quarterbacks that have recently won a Super Bowl, Dibs, and it's a who's who of Hall of Famers. It's Patrick Mahomes a number of times, obviously, we know that. It is Tom Brady. It's going back 10 years ago. It was Peyton Manning, although I know at that time Peyton Manning was on the tail end of his career, and that was actually the last game he ever played in. You have kind of an odd one in Nick Foles when he was the quarterback of the Eagles.
Right.
You got Matthew Stafford, who's going to be a Hall of Famer. Again, Brady and Mahomes and Stafford and Manning, all these guys. If you're going to win a Super Bowl, your quarterback can't just be good. Your quarterback is got to be great. There's very few instances where a good quarterback wins you that Super Bowl. Was Brock Purdy the reason they lost to the Chiefs? No, of course not. But was he able to just simply put the team on his back and lead a team to a victory? Maybe in the regular season at times, sure, but you didn't see it in the postseason. You didn't see it in the Super Bowl. And for a guy who's done as much as he did through the first year and a half starting as the last pick of the draft a couple of years ago and being thrust into a starting job randomly after 2 injuries, I feel like when we discuss this guy, we feel like he can't progress as a normal quarterback does. And if you were a quarterback drafted in the first round who through the first 2 years of your career, even if you have all these weapons that Brock Purdy has, and you accomplished everything that Brock did, except the only difference was you're a first-round quarterback, but you got to the NFC Championship game and then got hurt. Then you go all the way to the Super Bowl and fall just a little bit short. The conversation around that guy now would be, well, he's about to take a leap and he's going to put the team on his back. But I feel like we don't have that conversation with Brock.
But I don't think that it's his birthright to have that progression be absolutely a part of his career. And I think about Trevor Lawrence. And what did we think about Trevor Lawrence 2 years ago versus what we think about him now? And now there's a lot more talk about maybe Jacksonville is going to be looking for another quarterback in the future. They're going to possibly move off of Trevor Lawrence because last year he played well, and then it seemed like he regressed, and then it seemed like he got exposed. And now the number 1 overall pick in the draft, we're starting to have questions about whether or not he's actually good enough to lead a team to the promised land. And so Brock Purdy's progression and his improvement, it's not a birthright. It's not a guarantee. It's actually, I think, more likely that he regresses than that he actually gets better. To think that he's going to get better every year, I think is taking a lot for granted about any player. And he's gotten better from his rookie year through his second year, and now he's entering his third year. I don't think that it's just an automatic that he's going to continue to get better. He might flatline, and teams might continue to figure out what he does well and what he doesn't do well. And you saw a little bit of it in the playoffs where, teams were starting to make him hold the ball, taking away that first read, and make Brock Purdy have to either make a tough throw or pull the ball down and make a play outside the pocket.
That's interesting. So more likely that he's not as good as he was last year than he's better.
I think it's as likely. And you look at where he is now, and he is one of the best quarterbacks in football, and to think that he's just automatically going to get better in his third year, I think it does him a disservice.
Maybe, but if that happens, say he falls off a cliff is the wrong phrase. Say he regresses a little bit.
Sure.
How does this team win a Super Bowl then?
They can still win a Super Bowl. And how did they win a Super Bowl this year? How did they almost win a Super Bowl this year? It wasn't because their quarterback was thrown for 380. It's because they had a good ground game. They had a good defense. They had great receivers and a great tight end. They had a lot of other pieces around Brock Purdy. And you got to the point where you went to overtime with Kansas City, and whatever happened, happened. And you can put the blame wherever you want to put the blame. And a lot of us have talked about, a missed blocking assignment on a third down play where, if the blocker goes the right way, Spencer Burford, I believe, if he goes the correct way, and you pick up the pass rusher, you score a touchdown, and maybe this conversation isn't happening.
And maybe Ayuk doesn't want to be traded to the Jaguars either, because maybe he catches the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl. Who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah. All right, 888-957-9570. How does this Niner team get better? And does it rest on the feet of the young quarterback, Brock Purdy, or is that not realistic because of how well he's played through the first year and a half as being a starter? Again, the number, 888-957-9570. Up next is Norm in San Jose. Norm, what's up? You're on Willard and Dibs. Grandi in for Willard on 95.7 The Game. How you doing, Norm?
Hey, okay. You guys can hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
All right. Dibs and Grandi, how you guys doing?
Norm!
Thanks for taking my call now. Hey, no, Purdy isn't the reason they lost the Super Bowl. And I think the reason why they lost the Super Bowl and the one thing they need to get better is discipline. Throughout the year, there are too many penalties. Look, in the Super Bowl itself, 4 or 5 offensive penalty offsides? You guys have the count. You guys have the ball. How can you do that? And then McLeod trying to pick the ball up. I remember in high school, the coach spiking the ball into the ground 3 times consecutively just to show us, hey, the ball is not round. It's going to bounce every which way. And this guy is a pro. So why doesn't he just drop on the ball? And then the guard not pulling over to pick up Jones. He missed his assignment. Purdy might have had a little more time. But discipline, if they can... I remember one year the commentators were complimenting the team, saying, hey, this team hardly gets any penalties. 1, 2, 3 in the whole game. But yet this team, whenever you get offensive penalties, it stalls your drive. It kills you. The Niners would score a lot more if they wouldn't get those offensive penalties. And things happen during the game, like that McCaffrey fumble. Hey, you can't help those kind of things. That happens. But the penalties, you can keep that to a minimum. It's discipline.
Yeah, I'm with you, Norm. Discipline is a big opportunity for the 49ers to improve on. And we can point in any individual game, but it's obviously so highlighted in the Super Bowl, individual moments, one holding penalty here, McCaffrey not holding on to the ball on the beginning drive, as you pointed out, and Norm pointed out as well. Burford not blocking, one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, and all of those little things added up together, Dibs, the muffed punt, all those things together turn a win into a loss. So we can point at all those individual things on really any given game, but maybe Norm is right from a larger sense. It's just discipline, but over the course of an entire season, you're going to lose focus here and there. You just hope it's not in the Super Bowl of all games.
And that's my biggest takeaway from the Super Bowl was the attention to detail was lacking from, Trent Williams with a couple of penalties back-to-back and false starts and a muff punt and a blocking assignment that you couldn't convert and a missed PAT and all these little things, these small mistakes that don't seem big, they add up, and then you get to the end of the game, and they rear their ugly head. You had 2 third-down conversions that you could have converted in the fourth quarter and in overtime, and you didn't. One because you didn't block, you had an offensive lineman go the wrong way, and the other one because you didn't contain the left side of your pass rush, and you got a ball knocked down, and all these little things led you to a spot where you gave the best player in the game the ball with a chance to drive down and beat you, and he did.
Yeah, and we all could kind of feel it coming as well at that stage. At the end of the regular season and then in overtime
Once
as well.
They settled for 3 and you realized that Mahomes was getting the ball and all he needed to do was go 75 yards against a defense that just got gashed, you felt bad. Yes. It was a feeling of dread for sure.
And I still feel that dread.
I was going to say that dread is what you brought into the show today.
Yes.
That feeling of dread, not about 6 weeks ago, but about 6 months from now.
Yes, exactly. And it was born from 6 weeks ago, but it is about the future because I'm not sure if in the future the Niners will ever have a better chance. Not ever, but this era of Niner football will ever have a better chance than they did just 6 weeks ago. 888-957-9570. So with all that said, is it just simply on the feet of your young quarterback, Brock Purdy? Is it up to him to improve and to therefore improve this whole team? What do you guys think? 888-957-9570. Up next is Vince in the city. Vince, what's up? You're on 95.7 The Game. How you doing today?
I'm good. What's going on, guys?
Not much, Vince. Just enjoying this a beautiful Friday.
It is, but this traffic is terrible.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
I think the issue with Brock is much like everybody's been saying. I feel like it's where he was drafted and the fact that he's looked at as an overachiever because of all the talent that surrounds him. But if you look at all the Super Bowl winning teams, those teams are absolutely loaded. So I don't know why he gets knocked. The only other thing I can think of is because he was the last pick, but Tom Brady was a 6th-round pick. So, I think if Brock continues to play the way that he has, I think we've seen enough that we can say this is the consistency we're going to get from him. I cannot see him being the issue. I think the team will win the Super Bowl and get better, which in these things that I think that I'm going to say, I think they've already addressed is the D-line for one, because towards the end of the season last year and then in the postseason, for some reason, our run defense was terrible. There were too many 5-yard, 4-yard pickups from the other teams where it was like, well, if they're going to give that up, what are we going to do? How do we stop the other team? And it was always a nail biter, and it was kind of worrisome where our defense before was, those dudes were nails. They weren't running the ball against us. You were going to have to beat us over the air. Also, I think we went away from the run game a little too much in the Super Bowl. And I still don't feel like we have that elite cornerback. I mean, Mooney Ward is an all-pro. He's a Pro Bowler. He's great, but I feel like we need a lockdown, shutdown corner. And then the last issue that we have to address is still finding somebody to fill in for Drake Greenlaw, because losing him is, I think, the single reason why we lost the Super Bowl. We lost his intensity and his coverage over the middle of the field, and Kelce got off in the second half after he went down.
Yeah, good call, Vince. The Drake Greenlaw injury, you're right.
Oh, devastating.
That changed the game. The energy was just sapped out of the 49ers sideline, and to the Niners' credit, they still were right there and could have easily won that game. But the Drake Greenlaw replacement is a big question. They did sign today Devondre Campbell, formerly of the Packers. A 2021 All-Pro, was fantastic in 2021's a tackling machine. Hasn't been as good the last 2 years and has missed a handful of games total the last 2 years. But not anything terrible that makes you super scared that he's going to miss a giant chunk of this season. He is turning 31 in July, I believe, which isn't super old. Certainly not. I mean, it's not bad for a linebacker. He does struggle in terms of covering people out of his linebacker spot. He's more of a run stopper or a rusher of the quarterback. He can't really cover all that well, but you don't need him to be your full season starter. You have Drake Greenlaw coming back, you would hope, at some point.
Yep.
And if he progresses quickly like he might, it's crazy how quick these guys come back from Achilles now. Maybe he doesn't miss all that much time in the first place. So They have their answer there for the most part, I think, but we'll see how the rest of the offseason does progress. One other thing, though, Dibs, I think when it comes to Purdy, and it's why in my mind I think he can take a step forward, it is the fact that this is his first real offseason. I mean, 2 years ago when he was drafted, he was the rookie, Mr. Irrelevant.
Right,
He wasn't even sure. Yeah, he wasn't even sure if he was going to make the roster first, and then he earned his way onto the roster, was the third string. Last year, he was the starter, but he was dealing with a torn UCL and had to rehab that all offseason. And then Kyle Shanahan called him up and said, hey, Brock, I'm going to try to coax Tom Brady out of retirement. If I can do that, Brock, you're not going to be our starter anymore, at least not for this year. This year, he's healthy, he's the entrenched starter, and it's his first opportunity to have a normal offseason as a starting quarterback in the NFL. And I got to imagine, Dibs, that's going to do him wonders when he prepares for his first normal season going forward.
It should. It should make some sort of a difference, but I look at how he came out last year to start the year, and it didn't look like he missed a beat. He was terrific in the start of the year. He was great all regular season, except for the Christmas night disaster against Baltimore where he lost the MVP. He threw 4 interceptions. They threw 5 as a team, and he saw the MVP award go up in smoke. Whether or not he would have won it, we'll never know. He might have still come in second place, but on that night, we realized that he wasn't going to win it. And in the playoffs, he was good. Maybe he needs to be great, and if a training camp is the difference between him being good and great, then so be it. And the caller was talking about Dre Greenlaw, and I do think the emotional loss hurt in the Super Bowl, but you and I have talked about it all week long. You drafted D. Winters and Jalen Graham last year. You drafted 2 linebackers, knowing that last year you had 4 linebackers. You had Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, who's back. You had Oren Burks, who is gone, and you had Greenlaw and Warner. So you drafted these 2 young guys for depth, and now you need the depth. And yes, you have Devondre Campbell coming in at 30. He'll be 31 when the year starts. And if he can't do it, well, then one of these guys you drafted last year, they had better be ready to step in, as well as Flanagan-Fowles, who I know is more of a special teams guy, but he played a lot of linebacker this year when you had injury need. You've got enough depth at linebacker if you drafted correctly last year when you spent a 6th round and a 7th round pick on 2 guys that you would hope this year would be ready to go.
Yeah, and that's where this draft comes in as well. I think our caller was talking about getting another lockdown corner. You're not getting that in free agency. You're not trading for one, so that's going to come via the draft as well.
Probably draft a guy, though, thinking about next year as opposed to this year, because you don't often see on winning teams a rookie corner step in and be the guy.
Generally not. And you can say that for a lot of positions when it comes to rookies.
I think corner is a big one.
Yeah, I'm with you.